Welcome everybody, Greg here with Laser Bear Industries to show the installation process on the NeoGeo CD Pad Repair Kit. So for those of you who don't know, the NeoGeo CD Pad had a micro switch enabled joystick. Now you can kind of hear on this one, we can click that way, but my button is no longer good going this way, or down. Up sometimes clicks, but not very often. So these buttons you can typically repair by taking them apart, cleaning out the buttons with like a deoxit. Try to, get the dust that builds up inside of them out. This is an effective repair if you've only done it, a handful of times, but you get diminishing returns on that repair every time you do it. And you're more likely to get to the point where you can no longer repair the buttons by just cleaning them. So you would have to replace them. In the past, in order to replace them, you would be taking buttons from another controller that may have, like this one has one that works. You would take that button and you would replace one that was bad in another one. So it's not an ideal solution. I came up with this solution where we're going to replace some of the parts inside of the mechanism to use off-the-shelf 6x6 buttons. So these have a good click to them. The actuation force on these are pretty close to what these are supposed to be. So it'll have a nice feel when it's all said and done too. So taking these apart, you got 5 screws in the back. I've already removed mine just to kind of make things go a little bit quicker. And then you just want to gently pull it apart. Now it's going to leave the board kind of attached to the front because the mechanism attaches to this front cover. So to get everything apart, you're just going to give a little bit of a tug, try to pop that cap off. That way you're not trying to jam something up under here and mar up all the plastic up here. Once that's out of the way, we'll just set it to the side. And we're also going to pull the actuator lever. So we just set that aside too. And we'll set the top shell of the casing aside. Now to get into these, you could go about it by just trying to desolder with like a solder wick to pull the solder up and then pull the whole mechanism out as a single piece. We don't necessarily need to do that, and I would actually caution against it so that you're not ripping these pads up by accident trying to get them out. So what I would suggest doing is if you pull these tabs out and gently pull this portion of the mechanism up, since we're replacing this part anyway, it's going to leave all of the bits of the mechanism that we need to have access to. So we're going to just set this part aside. We're not going to use this part anymore. And then we're just going to go in and pull up our actuators and springs. We have to reuse these with the new portion. So you want to keep those close by. And we're just going to set all 4 of them off to the side. The next part will be pulling our switches out. So if you've got your soldering iron, which I can zoom in a little bit onto this. Just make it easier to see what's going on here. And you're just going to heat up your tab, kind of lift it, and we're going to walk them up out of the solder. Puts the least amount of strain on the solder joints and should make it nice and easy to pull the switches out of the place. So you can kind of see these original switches. These have been worked on a few times. You can kind of see it's shiny because there's some deoxit that's starting to kind of phase through. And you're just going to go around and do the same thing to all 4 switches. And goal is just to pull them all out of the way for the next step, which will be prepping the board. And once we got all of these out of the way, I just go back through and do this little bit of prep by just making the solder nice and level and even on the pads. Because we're going to solder back up against that. So now our board is, for the most part, prepped. I'm going to set it off to the side just a hair. We're going to talk about the printed part for this. So if you see a little bit of stuff in here, this is not a big deal. This is really hard to get cleaned out, and it's just cured in place there. It's not going to hurt the print or anything like that. Same thing with any spotting or anything in here. This is still smooth, and the actuators are going to travel against it just fine. So to clean these up, if you purchased one of the kits that's not post-processed from us, you're going to first start by taking all of these button covers on. They have a little number 3 in them. Just pull them off. And what we're going to do is just make sure that the edge of them is smooth. So you can kind of see there's a little bit of a bump there. We're just going to go in and give it a good little snip just to smooth that out. We're going to do it with all 4 of these little button covers. So these are used to attach the springs to the 6x6 switches. Since the 6x6 switches, the button heads would not give anything for the springs on the actuators to press against. And just like that, all 4 of those are nice and cleaned up. And then we need to clean up the supports on the rest of this. So let me just zoom out. What I typically do is I'll go around and we're just pulling the supports away, kind of breaking them off. And you just kind of go all the way around. Make sure all of this smart material is out of the way. And we're going to go back through after this and clean up where the support posts touched the print. So you might see here, we've got a bit of a bubble. That is not going to affect the usage of this. This is actually a really thick bit of resin, which makes it really easy for like the bubbling to start happening in that print. So we're just going to go through and clean this up. We want just some space for it to be nice and smooth for the actuator arm for the thumbstick to be able to move around inside of this opening. So just like that. And then go through and I just clean up this outside edge. Give it a good once over with the knife. Come in this space that needs to be nice and flat for the covers. Give it a good once over. And once that's done, we're going to be ready for the next step of prep work for this part, and that is installing the switches. So what you're going to do is take your switch. You've got 2 legs on each side, and then there's flat sides. So what you want to do is just take 2 of the legs, bend them straight up, just like that. And then you want those legs to pass through this opening here, all the way through the top. And then I just make sure it's nice and flush, push it all the way into the part. You can make sure it pushed all the way to the back. And then we're going to take these legs, we're going to fold them over, and I just fold them flush. You can cut them off if you want to. They're not going to hurt anything if you leave them there. And depending on how you want to install your electrical connections back to the main board, you may want them there anyway. And we'll talk about that when we get ready for that next step. So then, just the same. All 4 of those are in place. Next step is to install the springs. So the way that we do that is this cap fits right into the end of the spring. Might have just a little bit of mess with just to get it in. And then you're just going to take and you want the cover of that cap to go over. Where did I set my knife? Just want to make sure that it is fully covering the switch. And then as you push in, looking good. Do the same thing with the next one. Just gonna go all the way around and get all 4 of those tucked in. And like I said, just want to make sure that all of these caps are sitting flush over top of those buttons. So I'm just going through and just making sure that the cap is seated nice on top of those buttons. Now that they're all seated, you see we can get nice clicks out of them. We're going to go back to the board. So we have 2 different options for the way that we install these buttons back. You can go back and do it the exact same way the old ones were, by just placing this back over and soldering your tabs from these buttons directly onto these tabs. That works fine. There is some concern that the constant vibration of such a large mechanism that is only held down by surface mount spots, you'll eventually damage or rip the traces. I know it's happened with regular controller or regular versions of these controllers with just these normal switches on them. So if you want to avoid that, one thing that you can do is you can put your switches on and have them floating from the main board. And I'll show you how to do that real quick with one of them. So you would just take some wire, strip your wire back just a little bit, my solder got moved. There. I'm just going to tend my leads. And we'll do it to the down or the up buttons, looking at it upside down. And all you really do here is color code doesn't matter or anything. You're just going to be connecting these to the other side of the button once you put the housing back on. So just like that, you can go through, do it to all 4 sets of leads if you'd like. And like I said, I'm just going to do it to the one on this one. And then you just take your button mechanism, set it over, push it down until it clicks into place. You can push these covers over top. Now you can see kind of where it's a little bit of a pain because it's pushed these buttons out pretty much as far as you can go and still be able to barely reach those solder pads. And all I do is come in and use the existing solder that's there, push these solder pads down, and if I need it, I'll come in and just throw a little bit extra solder on it. But I use the soldering iron to bend these tabs down to where they are in contact with the original solder pads. And like I said, just put a little bit of extra solder on as needed. This one's the probably worst one to do just because of how close it is to the wires. But you can get it in without damaging anything. Just got to be careful. And then the one that we did a little differently, I'll show that one to you real quick. All you're going to do is take your wires. You don't need a ton of wire. Just, you know, give yourself some space here. Quick cut. I'm just going to come in and pull off some of the... That's probably more than I needed, but just like so. Come in, hit these guys with a little bit of solder, and then you can put a little bit of solder on these leads. And the hard part is you're just going to want keep things as low as possible. And like I said, by doing this, you have isolated the pads from the switch. And by isolating the pads from the switch, if this moves around on the board while you're playing, it's not going to pull at these pads, and you're going to be less likely to damage them. I can't say for sure that, you know, that's what caused the damage to those. It could be that somebody worked on fixing them and didn't get the solder in very good, and it made it easier for everything to move. But I had some people voice concerns about that and wanted to know a way to solve that problem. After you've got that all taken care of, all your solder pads are good, next step is to reassemble your controller. So for reassembling a controller, you just put the board back in, feed the cable through the little loops that keep it so you don't pull the cable out. Make sure if you did this mod, you give yourself plenty of room for the standoffs to get out of the way. Oh, sorry, I forgot a step. You need to make sure you have this in, because that controller port, or controller mechanism, doesn't work without that. Crazy. Alright, set it down. Whoa, that is so much clickier. Alright, put everything back into place. And we're going to put the front cover back on. Go through, put your 5 screws in. I don't actually know where my screws went, so I'm going to have to find some compatible screws for them. And then you just take your cover for that, pop it back in place. This don't sound as great because my controller is not screwed together, but beautiful, much better. And that is the repair on the clicky NeoGeo CD pads. These are available at laserrepair.net. Thank you and have a wonderful day.